Sometimes money can buy castles, titles, and deeply unhappy marriages. This is the story of Consuelo Vanderbilt, a young woman born into one of the richest families in America, who was pressured into crossing the Atlantic to marry a British duke she did not love. To the world, she appeared to have everything: wealth, status, palaces, and a title that placed her among Europe's highest aristocracy. But behind the jewels and royal ceremonies was a woman trapped by a family ambition and social expectation. So, how did an American heiress become one of the most famous duchesses in Britain? And why did she eventually reject the very world she had been forced to enter? This is the extraordinary story of Consuelo Vanderbilt, the dollar princess who fought to reclaim her own life. Consuelo Vanderbilt was born on March 2, 1877 in New York City, at the height of America's Gilded Age. She belonged to the legendary Vanderbilt family, whose fortune helped define the industrial elite of the United States. Her father, William Kissam Vanderbilt, was the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the famous commodore who built an enormous transportation empire through railroads and steamships during the 19th century. By the time Consuelo was born, the Vanderbilt name had become synonymous with staggering wealth and social power. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, he left behind one of the largest fortunes in American history. Consuelo grew up surrounded by extraordinary luxury: massive Fifth Avenue mansions, lavish Newport estates, European travel, and endless displays of elite society glamour. But the most powerful figure in her life was her mother, Alva Vanderbilt. Ambitious, intelligent, and fiercely determined, Alva wanted more than wealth for her daughter. She wanted nobility. At the end of the 19th century, wealthy Americans still lacked the centuries-old titles and traditions of Europe's aristocracy. Meanwhile, many British noble families possessed titles and castles but desperately needed money. And so emerged the phenomenon known as the dollar princesses, American heiresses whose fortune helped rescue Europe's struggling aristocracy. Consuelo would become one of the most famous of them all. But beneath the glittering surface of her privileged life, pressure was mounting, because Alva Vanderbilt had already decided her daughter's future. In 1895, at just 18 years old, Consuelo Vanderbilt married Charles Spencer Churchill. The marriage instantly became one of the biggest international society events of the decade. The Duke of Marlborough possessed one of Britain's grandest aristocratic titles and was a descendant of John Churchill, the military hero associated with the victory at the Battle of Blenheim. But despite the family's prestige, the Marlborough estates were facing serious financial difficulties. Their enormous residence, Blenheim Palace, required massive sums of money to maintain. Consuelo's dowry, estimated at around $2.5 million at the time, helped stabilize the family's finances and preserve the palace. The arrangement perfectly reflected the era's transatlantic marriage market: American money exchanged for European titles. Yet behind the spectacle was heartbreak. The wedding at St. Thomas' Church attracted enormous crowds and international press coverage, but Consuelo herself later admitted she had desperately tried to avoid the marriage. In her memoirs, she described pleading with her mother to cancel the wedding. According to Consuelo, Alva emotionally manipulated her into proceeding, insisting the marriage must happen at any cost. Consuelo walked down the aisle in tears. To the public, she looked like a fairy tale duchess. In reality, she felt like a sacrifice. When Consuelo arrived in England, she quickly realized that becoming a duchess came with its own kind of prison. The transition from America's energetic high society to the rigid hierarchy of British aristocracy was emotionally crushing. At Blenheim Palace, every detail of life was governed by protocol. Her behavior, speech, appearance, and even daily routines were scrutinized. The pressure intensified under the watchful presence of the Duke's powerful mother, Lady Frances Spencer Churchill, who expected Consuelo to embody the ideal aristocratic duchess: elegant, obedient, and capable of producing heirs. The marriage itself remained emotionally distant from the beginning. The The Duke valued Consuelo largely for the fortune she brought into the family, while Consuelo struggled with loneliness and isolation inside the enormous palace. Although she fulfilled her expected duties, hosting events, managing appearances, and eventually giving birth to 2 sons, she privately experienced profound unhappiness. Letters and memoirs from the period reveal a woman trying desperately to adapt to a role she had never chosen for herself. Outwardly, she became one of Britain's most admired duchesses. Privately, she felt trapped. Eventually, the marriage deteriorated beyond repair. The couple separated in the early 20th century, and in 1921 their divorce was finalized, still a scandalous event within aristocratic society at the time. But for Consuelo, the divorce represented something far more important than scandal. It represented freedom. After her divorce, Consuelo Vanderbilt rebuilt her life on her own terms. In 1921, she married Jacques Balsan, a wealthy French aviator and businessman whose personality could not have been more different from the rigid British aristocracy she had known. For the first time in her life, Consuelo experienced a relationship based on affection rather than obligation. The couple divided their time between France and the French Riviera, living a quieter and far more relaxed existence. Freed from the crushing expectation of aristocratic duty, Consuelo began developing a stronger independent identity. She participated in intellectual circles, wrote openly about her experiences, and became increasingly involved in humanitarian and social causes. The woman once treated as a decorative symbol of wealth was finally becoming the author of her own story. During and after the First World War, Consuelo dedicated much of her time to humanitarian work. She supported hospitals, relief organizations, and charitable causes in both Europe and the United States. Unlike many aristocratic socialites of the period, her involvement often went beyond symbolic appearances. She also supported educational and social initiatives, particularly those benefiting women and children. Over time, Consuelo became more outspoken about the emotional cost of arranged aristocratic marriages and the pressure placed on women within elite society. In 1953, she published her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold. The book offered readers a deeply personal account of wealth, loneliness, aristocratic expectations, and emotional survival behind the glamorous facade of high society. It became one of the most important first-hand accounts of the Dollar Princess era. Consuelo Vanderbilt died in 1964 at the age of 87. Today, she remains one of the most famous American heiresses in history. Not because she married a duke, but because she ultimately escaped the role others had written for her. Her story represents more than wealth and aristocracy. It represents the collision between money and power, between appearance and reality, and between social obligation and personal freedom. Consuelo Vanderbilt may have entered history as a dollar princess, but she endured because she became something far greater, a woman who reclaimed her own life.